Uh, my name's McElveen. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, December 20th, 1925. My dad was in the WW1, First World War, and actually he joined when they had the Mexican border fighting down there. And he went in 1916 and then was transferred into the federal service, went overseas, was in a couple of battles and was hit by a machine gun in World War I. It took his right eye out and also his cheek. He's wounded in other places, and he stayed in the hospital in France and Walter Reed, New Orleans, in the States for a 2-year period, and finally got discharged. I mention that only because I happened to grow up around people who had been wounded and all, and also who were patriotic. If there was a parade going down the street, Dad was out there and I was with him. Well, we left New Orleans before I was 3 years old, and we moved up to New York. This wasn't what they declare as a depression in 1928, but jobs were hard to find with all these returning veterans and all. And so Dad went up there and found a job. We lived up there for 8 years, and then we returned south and went to a little town. It was my mother and father's hometown in Kentwood, Louisiana. I graduated from what we called at that time grammar school and moved back to New Orleans finally and entered Fortier High School in 1939. I participated in sports, partying, and I think had about a 1.7 grade point average. But at any rate, after football season in 1942, there were 4 of us. One was my buddy who went up to Kentwood High School and was an all-state ball player, 2 other guys. And we went down to the Marine Corps recruiting office because we really wanted to get into this war. It was going on. Our fathers had all been in it. And we went down and we happened to run into an old China Marine. And, they were something else. The last China Marine was 1941 and finished with him. He was grumpy and he said, "Come back when you start to shave." So the only guy that was old enough to get in had lost his trigger finger and he couldn't make it. He had to go into CBs. So my buddy and I were not going to be discouraged. We decided we'll get in the Merchant Marine. The Merchant Marine at that time was desperate for men. Incidentally, out of all the services, the Merchant Marine lost the largest per capita number of any of the branches of service. At that time, they were not considered a branch of the service, but they now have been. And they also have the Veterans Hospital and other benefits they didn't have. Well, we went down and through a little finagling and perhaps some half-truths, and we got our papers. At that time, it was the War Shipping Administration. And we got our papers and we got aboard a ship in New Orleans and we didn't like it. There was action out there. There were subs out there sinking ships and all, but it wasn't publicized much in the paper back then. They didn't want to alarm people. So we hitchhiked up to Norfolk, Virginia, got aboard a ship that was headed for Europe, and that's where we wanted to be. Got a hold of what they call an old Liberty ship. Well, actually, they were new Liberty ship. The government produced thousands of them during World War II. They were called floating coffins. And the reason when they were called floating coffins is they only made up to a maximum of 8 knots an hour. And a knot is 1.1 miles. But of course, they didn't average that because all the convoys had to zigzag. Well, we got a hold of it into that, and it was the SS Bret Hart. I shall never forget it. And they asked us first if we'd had any experience steering a ship, and absolutely. Well, whom do you think was up for the first watch when we were going to take off? They had a pilot, the first mate, and me. It didn't take him not a minute to know I had never been aboard a ship in my life. So he hit me upside of the head, and anyway, he was cussing me, very unfriendly like, until we got out. Well, I learned how to steer the ship, that was for sure. I did in convoy. We had 500 or plus troops that were in the whole of the ship. You can imagine how they lived down there. There was no air conditioning. They had to stand in line for 2 meals because by the time they finished service and it was time to start serving again, rather, you can imagine how much trouble they had when they wanted to go to, let's say, the little boys' room. There was always lines for everything. But the only entertainment they had was either reading, gambling, naughty boys, or boxing. And we had a ring on board ship there up on top of one of the hatches, and the guys pleasantly beat each other when the weather allowed it. We finally found out that where we were headed was during the Sicily invasion. It wasn't the assault, but it was the reinforcement group that was going in there. Going across the Atlantic, there were ships that were sunk in this massive convoy. The ships that went around protecting us, of course, were destroyers. And you could hear them, they'd be screaming there. And you know when they started doing that they had detected submarines, a wolf pack. And they were ships that were sunk. You never stopped because you couldn't jeopardize the convoy or your own ship with troops in it to go and help somebody else. That was the destroyers' jobs and other ships. We finally got over and we got to the Rock of Gibraltar when we were going into the Mediterranean. Our ship was damaged, the steering. So we didn't go into Sicily. We went instead to Algiers, Africa. I'll never forget it. You know, the Casbah, Charles Boyer. Anyway, it wasn't that way at all. We got there and they unloaded the troops. I don't know where they went from there. While we were there, I took advantage with my buddy who was there to go to English gunnery school. And we went through English gunnery school, got to firing pom-poms, 40 millimeters, 20 millimeters, anti-aircraft guns, all kind. We finally left, and after 70 days, then we returned to the States. We got back in November of 1943. We got back and we were taken out to California to get aboard a ship there. And my buddy and I, for various reasons, said, you know, this isn't really what we want to do. Let's see if we can get in the Marine Corps like we initially planned to do. So we went down to the recruiting sergeant and he says, man, we'd love to have you. You want to sign up right here? He said, no, we want to go home first for reasons of our own. So we did, and then we came back, joined the Marine Corps. I was trained in San Diego, California. I can remember on the train there, going over, my ears started to drain. And when I got there, I was all swollen and everything else. And when they were examining us, the doctor told me, he says, you know, you've got bad ears perforated. It was from swimming. You know, they weren't deaf at all. It's perforated. You can get out of the Marine Corps. I said, man, look, I just got in. You know, this is what I want to do. So I got on in and went into training, came through San Diego, California, went on up to line camp. And Leonard will mention more about all that training. I came out, and I can remember it was the last night that we were in San Diego, and someone with their infinite knowledge in the Marine Corps had decided that 45 automatic pistols don't shoot accurate enough or long enough, so they decided to don't issue any more of those to machine gunners and mortarmen and all. Give them carbines. Well, I had volunteered for machine guns, and I meant the kind that John Wayne went over the top with, one of those little ones, you know, in dress blues and stuff like that. I had never had any idea there's going to be this thing you could lug on your shoulder and, you know, hurt your neck and all that. But anyway, that's what I got. Browning light machine gun model, 1984. Anyway, I wanted something else behind the carbine. So the last night that we were in San Diego, I went and bought a gun from a guy that had a burlesque show. Forget, it wasn't anything illegal about it at all. I just bought the gun. Had a horse pistol, like about 6-inch barrel, And I got the holster and all, and I brought it on in. In those days, things were much more relaxed about personal weapons. I remember I had a throwing knife here, and I had a knife in my boots. I had my own shoes I bought, you know. And so then off we went, and we went into Hawaii, and we trained there. We didn't know where we were going, but later on it made sense because we were there where they had Hilo and all down there, and it was the big island of Hawaii, and they had a volcano there on that island. And we stayed in tents. That's the way we lived. We washed our clothes in cold water. It was a lot of fun showering there. We only limited to 7 cans of beer a week. There were a lot of things we had to give up. Finally, I think it was in December. It was December of 1944. We boarded ship, and it looked like they were going to let us do what we were trained for. So we boarded these transport ships, hit Honolulu, went ashore briefly with old wrinkled uniforms that we had, but they allowed us to go ashore. You might think guys would run to have a lot of fun in a drinking place or something. We went right away to the drugstore and had 4 eggs and chocolate milk, and I think I had a banana split too. Then we wanted to see what hula girls looked like, so we went into one of those places in a long line, and we got in there. You know how they always showed those beautiful girls? No. No way. So we left there sort of disappointed. Started on out. We finally hit the island of, I think what was it, Saipan? We went to Saipan. Took off from there, had some more training, and then we were told where we were going, and they showed us the picture of this island, Iwo Jima. It was, I think, 640 miles from Japan. It was something that was needed very, very much. It seems that our long-range bombers would fly, and they would try to bomb Japan mainland. Some of them got through, but they really didn't get into the places they want to get into. Often the planes were damaged, and then they'd have to go into the drink. They couldn't make it back, or they'd have to go into China, and God knows when they'd get back home then. So they needed it, first of all, for support aircraft to go with those bombers and all, and also for disabled planes to come and land. And 660 miles from Japan. They bombed it the year before, a few times and all. The Japanese had never really thought much of the island. There was no great reason to possess it before World War II. There was nothing there but sulfur mines, and they could grow some cane. So they had a sugar mill. They had a little over 1,000 workmen that were on the island, the Japanese, other people that they had conquered from the mainland and things like that. It didn't produce any revenue for Japan, but it was self-sufficient, so they left it there. About a year before they had the Japanese general came, Yamamoto, whatever his name was, I forget it, but he came in there and started fortifying the island. Year before, got the civilians off, began to bring in more Japanese troops. They brought in some Imperial Marines and all. And they, unbeknown to us, they had a series of hundreds of miles of caves, crevices. They began to put blockhouses, build pillboxes on it, everything camouflage. The island itself was 5 miles long, 2.5 miles wide at the widest spot, 800 yards at the neck, and over here was the volcano. And then we know why we were trained where we were. Mount Suribachi, that's what it was called. Well, it was bombed for 74 days before we hit. I mean, bombing. They thought that it would be a 72-hour operation. We anticipated there would be around 13,000 Japanese on it, but we of course assumed that many of those had already been killed because of the 74 hours of bombing. Well, we came in there, and at D-Day was 9 o'clock on February the 19th, 9 a.m. on February the 19th. We got up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I remember we went down for breakfast, and when we got there to breakfast, we had steak and eggs. And when they served us steak and eggs, we knew something was radically wrong. They just didn't treat you that good, you know? Mm-hmm. But we had our breakfast, and then we went and got aboard the amphibious. We were in LSTs, LCMs, different kind of boats like that. We got aboard it. We rendezvoused 4,000 yards out from the shore. There was a tremendous battle, blasting from the battleships, the cruisers. There were over 450 vessels in that fleet that brought us in there. And it was bombed. And then 30 minutes before, everything opened up. Planes were flying in. When we started in at this 4,000 yards, you couldn't see from the smoke in front of you in the volcano. It was already daybreak. It was 8:30, I think, when we came in. And we landed there at promptly right about 9 a.m. When we got aboard shore there, we were machine gunners, remember, and we had crewmen. The crewmen had 2 cans of ammunition, I think 20 pounds each. One guy had the tripod, the other had the machine gunners. We went out of the back. We hadn't run not 10 yards. We were bogging up to our ankles in this black sand. That's what they call it. I have a bottle of it with me today from Iwo Jima. The sand was completely black. You couldn't hardly run it, and your objective always is to get off of the beach. Because if the first 2 waves get bogged on the beach, the other waves are already coming in. What's going to happen? So that was our objective, to get off of the beach. And we tried, but when we ran, all of a sudden we were in a machine gun fire lane. And a machine gun fire lane will have like a machine gun over here and another one that way. And the fire is crossfire. And if you can imagine, they're moving this by mills. So the machine guns are doing this, and everybody in that place is being sprayed with bullets. Well, when we started across, suddenly my carbine, the carbine I hated, it was shot off my shoulder, splintered the stock. It's no good. I also felt something tug at my back. I rolled a couple of times, and as I've said so many times, the first thing I said was, my God, help me. I reached over and I felt something dripping. I could still move my arms and then my legs, so I knew I wouldn't hit the spine, and it hit my jungle pack in the back with this solution, iodine, or whatever it is they put in, and that's what it was. The friend to my right was Walter Henry, and he hollered back and forth to me with all the machine guns going on, and us rolling, trying to cover ourselves. Are you hit? And he says, yeah, I'm hitting the leg. Where? He says, in the thigh. I said, can you run? Can you move? And he said, I think so. He says, it looked like it came out the other side, the bullet. So I said, well, we got to go. And I looked behind me, and behind me was the guy carrying the ammunition. One of them, his name was Juan. He was an American Indian that was raised on the reservation. And he was quite a guy. He was behind me, and he saw all this going on with us falling and rolling and everything like that. And we said, we got to move. So Walter Henry and I said, we'll go on 3. And on 3, we jumped up and we started rolling. We went again and again, trying to get off the beach. I looked back for Juan, and Juan hadn't moved. His head was like this, and I hollered. And one of my group said he had got shot in the head, and he was killed. So there we were. We hadn't been on the beach 5 minutes, and out of our own little group, I had been hit but not wounded. The other one was hit, and the other one was killed. Well, we crawled across this sand as fast, and I say crawled, believe me, these movies where they just run in, that's not the way it is, not when they're shooting at you with machine guns. We went on in, and we had to cross that 800 yards. One of the things that was sort of demoralizing that day was the fact that we had all this fire at us, but we never saw the Japanese. I didn't even see a Japanese. You see the fire. We were going through the cane fields and other things, crawling through there, and Suribachi was on this side, but we weren't getting too much fire from that. It was getting fire from the coast over there and from the high part. You see, Iwo, it went where the south end of it was the volcano, north end of it over there were caves and plateaus, but the ground went up all of it like that. So they were firing from high spots. And we finally got across the island and we set up the machine gun, and there was fire coming from the beaches on the other side, which would be the west side. A lot of firing come from there, and we thought it was, we didn't know what it was really because everything was camouflage. We set up the machine gun and we let out 2 bursts, and a burst normally is about 6 rounds. No sooner we let it out, bang, our machine gun was hit directly by bullets, and it sprung where the bolt wouldn't go through. There was nothing you could do about it. It was shot. Had to be some pretty powerful ammo for that. So then there it was, the carbine was gone, the machine gun's gone, and I have my lucky 6-shooter with me. We called for a tank, and I think the name still was, I think it was a Scorpion that came up, and we told him we didn't know what's out there, but it's firing. The tank went up and let out a burst, and this thing hit the tank, and then the tank caught on fire. We had a couple of men behind the tank that were moving up, and they were left out there. And when the tank turned around to we won't say run out of it, we'll just say retreat, he left the men out there, and they got shot. Oh, that was our first day, pretty much. We went to a tank then that had been completely damaged, and we took a machine gun off it. And the machine gun was the same machine gun that we use, except we had to have a bipod or a tripod with it. Then we started moving up to the north side, and we were to the north of the island. We were on the left hand, the west side, going up along the beach. That was where my group was. We fought along the way. The second day, we began to see bodies begin running to machine gun duels. They were excellent mortarmen. They had what they call a knee mortar. It was a little bitty thing like this and shaped like a knee there. Of course, don't be foolish enough to put it on your knee. You put it in the ground, but they could take these things into like a plumb line or something, and they could really shoot down a smokestack. They were good, real good. They were firing us with knee mortars, and then there was a rocket. I can't remember the name of that rocket anymore. It was a big rocket. You could hear it when it come over. It was a big Bertha. It would come, oh, it's a whirly. Is that what? Yeah. It would start coming over, and I'm telling you the truth. You could hear it at first. You're, my gosh, what is this thing? I don't know how much damage it did, but psychologically it was pretty good. Anyway, we got on up the island there until the 10th day, and we went through all different types of fighting and everything. To give you an example, the first day out of a Marine company with replacements and all that, we're about 300 men in those days. The first day we lost, either not all killed, but killed and wounded, we lost 85 men. In the first day, we weren't seeing many chaps at all. By the time the 10th day was there, we were relieved, and we were brought back to Suribachi. At that time, we had 65 men. We thought we were going back aboard ship. We cleaned out some caves, even went out in the water there and bathed. There's a war going on. You get pretty cruddy after 10 days, you know. And we were in the water. The weather there, I mean, remember this is February and March, and you're pretty far up there. And we just had summer outfits. That's all we had. We had a wool shirt and a field jacket, but we didn't have anything heavy. So anyway, we occupied our time with going into the caves and doing things like that and cleaning them out. Finally, we thought we were going aboard ship, but then after being back 2 days, it started to rain, and we were told by the company commander, they call out the sergeants. We had this strange feeling, you know. And they said, we're going back up to the line. So that's what we did. We went back up the line there. When we got up there, one of the first things that I had to do with my foxhole buddy was we had to relieve a point, an island there. And I know when we got to relieve this guy, I think they were with the 3rd Division. Weren't that the ones that came up behind? Yeah, I think it was 3rd Division. Okay. Anyway, we went to relieve them. The guy came out and said, what time you guys got here? I remember he was around 6 feet or so tall, and he had on a pair of Japanese short pants. As again, I say it was cold. They found dead jackets up and found the clothes. Excuse Jap, but I mean, that's what we called them at the time, not Japanese. And we put the, got the trousers on. He says, let me get my gun, machine gun. So this was a knoll up there. It wasn't a very big hole in there either. The guy called up, he said, oh, come on, what you doing? Buddy's with me there. And I said, let's see him crawl up there. The guy was slumped over the gun. He was shot in the head. Now we had to get him out, and I sure wasn't going to walk around that place. And we were still getting fire, and there wasn't enough room for all of us to get in there. So I was the largest, so we crawled in there, and we started pushing and pulling. And when we finally got his body out, it rolled him down this sand hole. And I remember it only took a flip or so, and he laid there. And this was the dusk. I can recall, I hear about people that had nightmares and all. I can't say I had nightmares, but I had bad dreams about that one occasion because I looked there at night and no one closed his eyes. And you would look down and see this guy, you know, that you'd talk to, and he was almost out like that. And life was over, just split second like that. So anyway, we came through it, started moving up where they had the sulfur beds. I remember that was a delight. It smelled like rotten eggs, but when you took your boots or shoes off and put your feet down there, it was so warm with the salt coming out of there. Anyway, we moved on up, and finally on the 15th day, well, it was actually before the 15th day, I got a replacement. When we got up that far, they split up our group and brought in water-cooled machine guns. This was a 1917 model. Our weapons were 1917 and 1918. The Japanese were 1933 machine guns. At any rate, they gave the replacement. He was 33 years old, and he had 3 kids. And we were all in our teens, most of us, teens, early 20s. And really didn't belong there. I think he'd been in the Marine Corps for 4 months or something. And he didn't know anything about a machine gun, and that was my replacement. On the 15th day, for the first time since we've been on the island, no one tried to attack. We knew that we had forced them up. Oh, I guess we were 30-some-odd% of the way up to the island. We knew that, well, we didn't all know at that time, but reading later that their general, who was on that island, the Japanese general, said that he hadn't eaten in 5 days and that they were going to fight to the last man. This was supposed to be a 72-hour operation, you know, and here it went on for all this time. They were running out of supplies. Actually, they had over 20,000 men on the island. I think it was between 20 and 22,000 men on the island. We had estimated about 13. They were vicious fighters. They were fanatics. I mean, they were not afraid to die. I'm talking about in general. Some of them jumped over the cliffs and things rather than be captured by the Americans. They were ready and dedicated to fight till death because they thought if they did, they would go to their heaven, meet their emperor or whatever. So we prepared, put new barrels in the machine guns because they burn out under all this heat, and we got ready to move on. And the next morning, 16th, was when everything broke loose. Everybody attacked. By misfortune, they were also ready to fight till death. I mean, we weren't 30 yards apart in some of these areas. I was behind the machine gun, and I was telling this fellow, look, don't kneel up like that. With a machine gun, those always like this, you fed the belt. The belt came out of a steel can. And you fed this belt into the gun to see that it didn't jam or anything. That was it. I told him, I said, listen, lay down flat on your stomach like this. Spread your toes out, your heels in, feed me the belt. I no sooner said it. Somebody came out one of those caves in back of me, and bang, he shot me, got me in the leg. I tore it up rather badly, and my artery was hit, main artery was hit. So I knew what to do, call somebody else, and they came over, and I started crawling to get into this crater there, the small one. And I got in, and a couple of guys calling for corpsmen. I was rather lucky. One got there in a very short time. And the first thing he did was hit me with some morphine. And then the next thing he did was address this artery thing. Or maybe he got the artery first. I don't recall, one or the other. And then they put a tourniquet on. And he said, hold the tourniquet, and I'm going to bandage you. So he started trying to lift my leg and hold the bandage, and bullets are going off. And suddenly, a guy by the name of Jump, who was on our company, came by and he says, can I help you? Max shot, yeah. So he got in, and the corpsman, his name was Ray Hansen. Ray Hansen came in and he said, lift up, hold the leg while I do this. And then he took the bandage and he was ready to apply it to my leg. And when he did, a mortar shell went off right next to him. He bent over my body. The other fellow's holding my leg, and he got hit in the face. So the bandage that was going on my leg went on Jump's face. He said, take it easy, you'll be all right, kid. And I'm thinking, I'd rather be shot in the leg than I had shot in the face. So it wasn't vanity. I just figured it was a better place. So at any rate, my leg was bandaged and all, and he left me there. It was one thing that got me. I've always seen these pictures and all where they gave you a little brandy. Well, he didn't have it. So, in fact, so he left me, and there were supposed to be stretcher bearers to come back. Well, I laid there, and I laid there, and I laid in on stretcher bearers, and I know that everything's going off. I can hear it. My friend come back, one of my machine gunners in my squad, and he says, Mac, all hell broken look at you. I said, I know that. I realize that. Let me have your horse pistol. This is all I got. He says, I need it more than you do. He says, you got to take it back to the States. Well, he convinced me, and together we got my shoulder hole thrown. All right, here I am with a tourniquet, bleeding to death, and we're getting this thing off me. And he takes my gun and he leaves me. And then I had a knife and I had a grenade. That's what I had. Everybody comes in here. We had lost some of our people because of the Japanese climbing into the foxholes at night. Usually you try to have 2 men in a foxhole. And one could try to nod maybe, but if he was so inclined. But they would come in, jump in there with a saber, a knife. They carried these, some of these officers carried these long sabers. And we had already had people who had been viciously slaughtered by these things. So at any rate, I laid there, and then finally another fella came back to me. And he said, you're still here? And I said, yeah. And he was shot in the arm. He says, I'm going to get some corpsmen, stretcher bearers. And the stretcher bearers usually aren't the frontline fellows. They're replacements or cooks or somebody like that usually. Okay. So they got the stretcher bearers and him with this one arm, and they're going back. And then the mortar shells would come in. Well, after you hear mortar shells a while, after you've been in combat, you know pretty much, you can gauge about where they're going to hit. You can always see the seasoned troops will be going along, not paying attention, and somebody hadn't heard them, thinking they're going to hit. Well, when the mortar shells start flying, and they're trying to take me back to Battalion 8, they just drop me. You just drop them on the ground, and then he'd scream at them to come back here and get me. It was a natural thing to do. Anyway, they finally got me back into the cave, and I got medical attention there, and I lost it about then. I don't really know much, except I know I had a cast on my leg, and I had they were giving me plasma. The next morning, I spent the night in the cave. The next morning, I was flown off of one of the airfields, the second airfield that we had taken. And actually we'd taken and finished and everything else because the Japanese were building them. I was taken off and I was flown to Guam. And when I got to Guam, I can remember before we landed on the ground, I never understood what it was, but they sprayed the place. And, I had 3 blankets on me because it was chills and all. And here they're spraying. What are they spraying? They can't be any bugs or nothing. Contaminating. Being a kid, I didn't know. And they packed out, and the first thing they said to me was, "Would you like some nice cold lemonade?" And the last thing in the world, wouldn't have anything was cold. I was trembling and all. Well, they got us in the hospital there. There were still Japanese on the island. I mean, it was all secured, but they were still out there in the jungle. Here, so I don't mean an army of them, but I mean, there were isolated cases out there. I was put into a hospital room there, a ward. They put us into amputee wards. Well, first they put me into a ward, and then we found out wounded on March 6, 1945, on March 9th, March 10th, morning, awakened, and my foot was blue, just blue. So I mentioned it to the nurse, and the nurse called the doctors. And it's strange, I remember things like that, but it was Dr. Beatty, Beatty, which was my mother's name, maiden name, and Dr. McGregor, Scotsman. Thank God they put me in the hands of a Scots Irishman. So they came in and they cut the cast, and they cut me down here. Well, first they cut me here. And when they did, the leg just opened up. And then they cut down here, scaffold. And again, it was what? Didn't feel anything. And then they cut me here and I flinched. Well, I knew what that meant. And I asked them one thing that, it's difficult for those doctors, even though they see a lot of this, to tell a 19-year-old, 18-year-old kid, you're going to lose your leg. But I asked one thing, can you save the knee? And they said, we're going to try everything we possibly can. So that same day they took me in there. I had gas gangrene. The gas is very contagious. It moves very rapidly. They have to get to you. So they amputated my left leg there. They had ward. Now I was in an amputee ward, and they had ward of 60 people. They had 2 quiet rooms in the ward. I was put in one. I was in that kind of condition. And the other one, they had an officer that was pulled in by mistake, and they put him in, and he had lost his arm to a Japanese saber. They came and asked me, they had the priests come by and the ministers and everything, they talked to you, and I couldn't eat anything, obviously, and I was being fed intravenously and everything like that. But they said, have you written your family? And I said, no, I'm not going to. They said, why? Well, we'll write a letter for you. I said, if my family got a letter written by somebody else, they would know that I'm not in good condition, and I don't know that. I didn't know that they'd already, the letter is dated, I think the 7th, the day after I was wounded, a letter to my family and all saying that I had been wounded. It said rapidly. I stayed there for over a week, and finally that I was feeling better, and they moved me out into the ward because I wanted to be around other people. I might mention that they were feeding me brandy because I had no appetite, and they were giving me a shot in the morning and one before each meal. And they moved me next to a guy. All I know was Joe. And when they came by, Joe had 11 multiple wounds. He had little inner tubes. He had one leg off, and the other one they thought was going to go. He was in a real mess. And he'd moaned a lot, and he was in pain, and they said, well, we're going to give you some brandy. He says, I don't drink. And I said, shut up. Quiet. Anything I can do for you, tell me. So there I was on a special diet. They were feeding me lamb chops and lamb chops, steaks, roast beef, things like that, and everybody else was eating it. I won't use the word of what they called it, Leonard, but that normal Marine Corps food. And I had it there. I was quite comfortable. My nurse was around 21 years old, and my pet name for her was Candy Lamb. And when she took excellent care of me, she brought me extra cokes and things like that, and told me her love life and who she was engaged to. It was a great, great thing I had going there. So when they said, we're going to move out some of the troops to the stateside or back to Hawaiian Islands there in the Naval Hospital, I said, look, leave me right here. I'm happy here. I can't walk and anything until this lake's all right. I had a traction on the lake because usually in those days when they gave you an amputation, they gave like what they call a guillotine cut. With me, since I only had 5 inches and I was 6'4", I don't think I was 6'4" then, I kept growing, but I was over 6'2" anyway. They decided if I got too short, I wouldn't be able to, have to lose a knee. So they gave me a flap amputation. They trimmed the bones and everything else. The only problem with something like that is you were more prone for infection. And then to be sure that I didn't run into a problem, they put a 20-pound weight and they would pull down on the skin. It's just 20-pound weight. I can remember there, I was laying there for weeks and the guys wanted to play poker, and I kind of liked the game. They used to put the board right across my middle. One guy get over there, a couple would go over there, and I'd play poker until I'd pass out, and then come back to it, and we'd start the game again. It was one of those situations. But one of the most horrifying things that I think I ever saw in combat was these people, we used to call them mummy cases. And these were people who was hit either by a flamethrower or people who were flamethrowers and had their tanks hit. I mean, it was a terrible thing to see a human being out there all on fire, particularly one of your own buddies. Well, this guy was burned all over, I think, except the bottom of his feet. He had like gauze wrapped all of him, his fingers. The only places they had opening was for eyes and for the mouth, and his lips were burned off. And when they would take this guy, you could hear the screams when they started changing the dressing. I don't know what but they put some kind of a liquid on it to soften it because it was all, oh God. And when the guy came to you, he liked to smoke, and they had something rigged up like a balloon to push the air, to suck the air, and he'd try to shoot it in his mouth, and then he'd come over to you to help him. And when he came over, believe me, the odor from this guy, which didn't want to hurt him, didn't want to let him know, And anyway, it's just one of those things that impress you. Everybody, now how bad people might think they are. There's always somebody a lot worse. I can remember, I never had too many guys in combat that I knew of, at least in our group, that ever complained too much. Even the ones that were wounded, it wasn't so badly how a guy was wounded or injured. It's how he accepted, you see. And I don't mean accept just the fact, but could live with it and try to go ahead in life. So, at any rate, when they had someone that wasn't handling himself too well, what they used to do is move a bed, his bed, over to a couple of guys that had the right outlook on life, that were positive. And maybe a guy who had lost 2 limbs instead of 1. So a guy there with just a leg off when the guy next to him's got 2, he couldn't very well complain, could he? I mean, it just couldn't do it. Eventually, they decided that I had to go back to the States. No, they got me aboard ship and went to Pearl Harbor, went to the Naval Hospital here. Well, I can remember now, I had been on bed and I had this weight on me and everything else, and I had my special diet and I'd had my brandy, and they got me here. And the next day when I asked them, you know, how am I going to get around here? I weight on my leg, where's my brandy? And it's, you don't have any more brandy. Well, anyway, that was quite a shock, and I never liked that nurse again. I got a pair of crutches, and I had to go to the bathroom, and I stand in the crutches and I wobbled. You know, I've been in bed now for 6 weeks or so, and I had to lay back down. Well, anyway, one of those things, when I finally got to the bathroom, it didn't do any good because I hadn't been standing up doing anything. So I was just in a terrible shape there for a little while. Well, after a week, they decided that they had a shipment going to the States, and who wanted to go? Me, because I never did get over that nurse, you know. Went back aboard a converted ship, passenger liner, and I remember that my company executive officer came down to see me. He had been wounded. In fact, at EWO, we didn't have but one officer left after the third day. Our captain made a mistake of standing up on the beach, and he never made it past that. He was a great guy. He was shot in the neck, and our executive officer got shot. And then every other lieutenant got shot except one who was a junior officer, and a sergeant took over the company. But anyway, our executive officer came by to see me. We got back into the hospital, went into Mare Island rather. They then wanted to know if anything. I was only there for a week, and they said they were going to have a train going over to Philadelphia Naval Hospital, which would be nearer to home. Oh, I wanted to go. It was the largest shipment of amputees that had gone across country like that in one group. And I can remember when they boarded us, it was a pretty train and new and like a streamlined thing. And they got in there and showed they had a menu. We could get what we wanted to eat, this or that. Oh, this was living. And so we got in there and we were all comfortable alone. After they had the photographers in there and the newspaper and everything like that, we went a couple 100 miles and they transferred us off into this old cattle car like they usually had. And then I got a upper berth. I'll never forget. One leg. Anyway, we went across country into Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and we got there, and then we started having surgery, other things. We all liked California. I had dropped down to 130 pounds. They used to call me Bones, and my buddy there they called Runt. He always said, "Here you are, you got your leg shot off below knee with all that leg, and here I am little, and I got mine shot way up there." Runt, I called him. He called me Bones. That was the greatest liberty town, I think, that in Chicago, probably in the United States. The people just welcomed you. The Marines, I'm talking, they hadn't seen many Marines. They were just wonderful. I finally was discharged in October, I think, 27th of 1945. After discharge, I went back and I finished that little bit of high school I had to in the Maven School for Graduates. I mean, it was accelerated course. I only had to go a few months. Took English up to 8th grade. Forgot it then. English 8, 4 years of stuff. And then I went to Loyola University of the South. Went through there, finished pre-law. Finally decided to marry. Child came along, and I decided to go to work instead of continuing the school. I was supposed to go into law, but I never really wanted to go into law. But they had this guy that was an advisor, and he went down there and They took my aptitude and it said I had an aptitude of writing. I don't know where they got this from, and poetry, and it sure didn't sound like me. But anyway, that's what they said. Well, you got to do something. You have to take law, whatever. Well, why can't I, do this? Well, you can't because you're late. I'll never forget this guy, and his name was Dr. Crew. He had one eye going each way, and he was telling me that I wasn't fit. So anyway, I finished pre-law, and then I decided that I was going to go into the business world. I did. How much time do I have?
16 minutes left on the tape, 15.
Okay, all right. I decided then that I was going to go to work. One of my first jobs, I started with Reed Unit Fans Incorporated. They were the so-called inventor of the window fan. In those days, homes didn't have air conditioning. So I got a job with them and moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I can recall when we got out of college, the one thing that we wanted to do was make $200 a month back in those days. And I missed it. My first job paid me $175. Anyway, I went on with the Reed Fan Company and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the accounts I got was Southern Bell, it was called at that time, and put window fans into their buildings and all. So that first month of my fiscal year, I went up there at a salary, I think, of $4.25 a month. I was really making big money. And I can recall I made my year's quota and bought a new house. My first house was under $11,000. And then when I got up there, I bought a house that was all brick. And I can remember it had 2 baths. I didn't know houses had 2 baths. 2 baths, and had a fireplace in the dining room and the living room. It was all brick. And that cost a lot of money. It cost $13,000, I can recall very well. I stayed up there until air conditioning started to take over, moved back to New Orleans, went to work for a company called Scott Atwater Outboard Motors. There was only 4 big companies in it, Johnson Evinrude, Gale Products, which was the same company really, and Mercury Motors and Scott Atwater. I was with them for four years. I was a district manager of the company. I had 8 states, and eventually they sold out to McCulloch Corporation, which is a chain saw people, and suddenly my large expense accounts were cut, and I just couldn't live with the company. I didn't care really how much they paid me as long as my expense accounts were good enough. But I left the company and went to work for Polaroid Cameras. I had 5 states with them, a multi-million-dollar territory. They were going to move me to Chicago as a promotion, and I refused to go to Chicago and live. It's a great town. I like to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, and I didn't want to live in. I just like the South. So I left them and started with a company called Frederick Air Conditioning. And Frederick was the most prestigious room unit at that particular time that you could find. They also made central, and they made commercial refrigeration for stores like grocery stores and things like that. You walk in there in a big cooler. I went to work for them, and I worked with them for 15 years. I was promoted to advertising, sales promotion, sales training manager. Then I was promoted to room air conditioning sales manager, national sales manager, and then I was promoted to vice president of sales. And I stayed with them for 15 years. And finally left them. I decided that I made a lot of money for a lot of people and trained them and all. I thought I could really go in business myself. So I did. It cost me $66,000 before I got started. At any rate, that's so much for smarties. I was looking for other lines, and I read something in the Wall Street Journal about a classic fan company. And I called and talked to the president of the company, and he said, I'd like to talk to you with your background. Well, it was back to the fan business, but I did know the ventilation business, and I had sold to major department stores and practically every major department store chain in the country. So I went out there and talked to him, and he said, we're a small company. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you this salary. And I said, well, that's not near what I'm making. He says, look, make you vice president of sales and general manager, and I'll give you this salary, but what I'll do is I'll pay for your apartment for 6 months, because I said I have a home and I have to sell it, and I'll get you some furniture in the apartment, and I'll give you living expenses, and I'll give you $1 a fan. I said, $1 a fan. I said, how many fans did you sell this year? He said, 77,000. I said, well, that's pretty good. How many you intend to sell next year? And he said, 200,000. I said, quit looking. You found your man. And this is the way it went. I went out there. My wife had to stay trying to sell the place. I went into an apartment. I worked Sundays. I worked Saturdays. I had to hire a sales department. I had to make personal selling calls. I had to tell him, you're nagging me to death. I'm hired as a vice president, not a sales guy. But at any rate, I got it started, and my wife moved out, and we bought a new home, very nice home. And the first year he said you've made me a millionaire. The second year he said, you made me a multi-millionaire. Just the amount of profit that was coming into these fans. We were selling fans for resale for $300 and $275, and these fans weren't costing us $70. I mean, you're just making a tremendous market. That's when ceiling fans came in. The cost of electricity was going up, and they were advertising. Instead of using your air conditioner and keeping it at 75 degrees, if you put in a ceiling fan, it will give you the effect of your moist skin on you. With the air movement, it will give you the effect of being 2 or 3 degrees less. Oh, anyway, I stayed with him for a while. I signed up J.C. Penney in New York, and I went to their catalogs and everything else. And I signed up some other major accounts. And then he decided to go into China, the People's Republic of China. These fans were being made in Taiwan. And we had a plant, and our agreement was that we were going to start making them there in Dallas, Texas, which never materialized. And after going into People's Republic of China, suddenly we began to what I call patina fans. Instead of brass, they were a greenish color. We got what they call potato chip blades. And instead of nice strong blades, they would kind of pop and crack and chew. Oh, I left that company too. It went bankrupt 7 months later. And I don't mean because of anything great I had done, but it went bad because of bad management and jobbing it out to People's Republic of China. After this, I'd had enough working for other people, and I went back to the manufacturer's rep business, and I also become editor of the air conditioning, well, they call it the HVAC, heating, air conditioning, and ventilation news. It's, I think, one of the largest trade papers in the country. I was editor of Louisiana and Mississippi. Now, I had found my niche in life. I was still a manufacturer's rep, and I had repeat business where I didn't have to go out and sell all the time. This business was coming into me. And I never wrote about air conditioning. I wrote editorials. I wrote about Bill Clinton and other people. That some of my statements weren't flattering, but I just enjoyed it. I remember once that our largest account came in and said, I'm from Arkansas too, and I know him, and I don't like your comments. And I told the publisher, nobody dictates my editorial policy. Anyway, eventually came along this lady here, it had gone kaput. I had been a reserve police officer for 30 years in New Orleans. I had gone through obstacle courses. I had been promoted through civil service examinations to a lieutenant. I had also been through the Dallas Sheriff's Department. I was a certified firearms instructor. I'm mentioning all this, the fact, because I had a leg amputated. And again, it's an outlook on life on what you can do. So I guess maybe some of us tried a little harder. And I took judo. And after so many years of this knee was broken down. So I went in for and I'd already had a service-connected foot that was bad. I went in for a simple knee implant, and I caught 2 staph infections and had surgery 15 times. And so finally they took the calf out and they took the knee off. And I remember when they took the knee out, I said, "Isn't this going to shorten me?" And they said, "Yeah, about an inch." Well, I was 6'4" then. And I liked being 6'4". I like being 6'4" and 220, you know, with a 36-inch waist, 48 shoulders. I like that. Well, when they shortened me, they came in and the guy measured me because I had a prosthesis, and he says, "My God, Mac, you're 4 inches shorter." 4 inches shorter. And I'm already shriveling over my back. I was under 6. I never forgave the doctor for that. I want to let you know that. Anyway, they finally tried to fuse the knee. I didn't want that. I was going to have a stiff leg. But after 2 attempted fusions, it failed. They took out my calf and ligament. Anyway, I ended up in the wheelchair. That was 10 years ago. I had a heart attack on the last surgery. I finally just give up. The heart did, not me. And anyway, I'm finished. I finished work, retired. I had my successes in life. I had a gorgeous wife who was, we were married 59 years before she died a couple of years ago, and had 3 gorgeous daughters, 6 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. It looks like they're trying to work that number up some. I've had a happy, contented, and challenging and successful life. I don't mean to. Oh, good natured. Let me. We never had an argument in our lives. Yeah, they get old, don't they?
That's the same book. Looks like it's the same one anyway. Copyright 1950.
That's what I said, wasn't it?
Well,
I said 1950.
that's what the book says. Copyright 1950.